The helicopter's blades cut through the thin air above the Peruvian desert. As Giorgio Tsoukalos leans out, eyes locked on the ground below, beneath him, lines stretch across the sand, straight, perfect, endless, shapes of birds, spiders, and something that looks disturbingly mechanical, the Nazca lines. He grips the seat tighter as the pilot circles back. These were drawn thousands of years ago, Giorgio mutters, voice trembling with awe. But who were they trying to signal? The desert offers no answer, only silence. A silence that feels ancient and waiting. For most people, this would be just another archaeological curiosity. But for Giorgio, it's something else entirely. He isn't looking for art. He's looking for evidence. Evidence that the truth about our past has been hiding in plain sight. To the world, he's a meme, a man with wild hair and wilder theories. But behind that viral image is a relentless seeker, a man who has devoted his entire life to one dangerous idea, that humanity's story didn't begin or evolve alone. It all started years ago, not in a desert, but in the quiet hum of a small library. Giorgio, a young student fascinated by mythology, came across a strange pattern in the stories of ancient civilizations. Cultures separated by oceans and time spoke of the same thing, beings who came from the sky, shining like fire, teaching mankind art, language and architecture. Different names, same story, gods descending to earth. But what if they weren't gods at all? That question refused to leave him. It dug into his mind, reshaping his view of history itself. Imagine him, sitting in that library, flipping through texts that the world treats as myth, and realizing they sound less like fantasy and more like memory. He began to see the connections others ignored. The winged gods of Sumeria, the fiery chariots in the Mahabharata, the feathered serpent of the Mayans. They all described something, or someone, descending from the heavens, in light and fire. And once he saw the pattern, he couldn't unsee it. He left the comfort of ordinary life behind. No more desk, no more certainty. Instead, dusty ruins, endless flights, long nights under alien skies. Egypt, Peru, Mexico, India. Each place carried echoes of the same mystery, symbols, carvings, alignments that seemed too advanced, too deliberate for their time. Giorgio wasn't just following clues. He was following a trail left by something, or someone, humanity had forgotten. And yet every discovery came with a price. Scientists mocked him. Scholars dismissed him. Interviewers smirked when he spoke. "Where's your proof?" they'd ask. But Giorgio had stopped chasing their approval long ago. Proof, to him, wasn't just in lab results. It was in patterns, the kind that stretched across millennia, patterns carved into stone, sung in legend, hidden in plain sight. The kind of proof that couldn't be explained away as coincidence. Late at night, in lonely hotel rooms, filled with maps and notes, Giorgio would draw lines between civilizations, from Egypt's pyramids to Mexico's temples, from India's Vimanas to Peru's Nazca lines. The connections formed a web of impossible precision, each culture pointing not inward, but upward, to the stars. He'd stare at the map, exhaustion burning in his eyes, and whisper the question that haunted him. Did they all see the same thing? Because deep down, he wasn't just chasing aliens. He was chasing belonging. The idea that humanity is part of something greater, something cosmic, that our ancestors weren't primitive dreamers, inventing gods, but witnesses of something extraordinary. Maybe they didn't worship the heavens because of faith. Maybe they worshiped them because they remember. As Giorgio stands now in the desert, staring down at lines that stretch for miles, he feels that memory pulsing beneath the earth. Every grain of sand seems to hum with the same secret, a story written across the planet, in symbols, waiting for someone to read it. He adjusts his headset, eyes still locked on the horizon. The helicopter turns, catching the last light of the setting sun. If they came once, he murmurs, maybe they never left. And somewhere, beneath the weight of centuries, the earth holds its breath. The torchlight flickered across the temple walls, revealing faces frozen in stone. Human, yet not quite. Giorgio stepped closer, tracing the carvings with his fingers. Eyes too large, skulls elongated, hands holding strange, cylindrical shapes. The air was thick with the smell of age and dust. Every sound, the scrape of his boots, the echo of his breath, seemed to bounce through centuries. He raised the torch higher, and there it was, a figure descending from the sky, surrounded by beams of light. Not wings, not clouds, light, the kind no ancient artisan should have known how to depict. Giorgio exhaled slowly. He'd seen this before. Different continent. Same story. The next morning, as dawn crept over the jungle canopy, Giorgio stood before the temple steps, camera crews setting up behind him. But his focus wasn't on the production. It was on the question that haunted him. How could civilizations oceans apart tell the same story? How could the Mayans, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, people who never met, never traded, all describe beings descending from the sky? He looked at the carvings again and whispered, they were trying to tell us something. They always were. In Peru, the gods arrived in golden ships. In India, they roared down in chariots of fire. In Mesopotamia, they came from the heavens to teach mankind. Each story carried fragments of the same truth, filtered through language and time. But somewhere along the way, myth replaced memory. Humanity forgot that these could have been encounters, not fantasies. Giorgio couldn't accept coincidence. Not when every temple, every legend, every whisper from the past seemed to echo the same pattern. Visitors from the sky, teachers of civilization, and a promise that they would return. It's easy to dismiss myths as metaphor. Easier still to call them imagination. But Giorgio believes that imagination has limits, and ancient people didn't invent details they couldn't understand. They carved what they saw. They built what they witnessed. Their gods had helmets, their chariots roared with flame, and their messengers descended not from clouds, but from the stars. Somewhere in the fusion of faith and fear, they turned encounters into worship. He remembers standing at the base of the Great Pyramid, staring up until the stone blurred into sky, thousands of years old, aligned perfectly with the stars of Orion's belt. Coincidence, but how could such precision, such cosmic alignment, appear in multiple civilizations across the world? In Mexico, the pyramids of Teotihuacan follow the same pattern. In Cambodia, the Angkor temples mirror Draco. Ancient builders didn't just build up, they built outward, toward the heavens. He began to see history not as a timeline, but as a code, the monument. Every myth, a fragment of a greater message. Maybe the ancients were never trying to explain their gods to each other. Maybe they were trying to remind the future of something they had seen, something we lost. When Giorgio travels, he watches the locals, the way they still pray to the sky, the way they still tell stories of those who came from above. There's a sorrow in their voices, as if they remember something beautiful that slipped through humanity's fingers. They taught us everything, one elder told him in the mountains of Bolivia. Then they left, and we forgot how to listen. Giorgio wrote those words in his notebook and never forgot them. That night, in his tent, rain pattering softly on canvas, he opened his journal and stared at the sketches, symbols of suns, stars, and beings with radiant heads. He could almost hear the hum of engines buried in the past, echoing beneath the myths. He thought about how small we are, how fragile our understanding of history truly is. What if every civilization, every stone, every legend was just another voice in a chorus, all singing about the same visitors, the same sky? The deeper he looked, the harder it became to see myth and history as separate, The gods of the old world, Anunnaki, Virakaka, Quetzalcoatl, they all had one thing in common. They came from above, and they promised to return. That single thread pulled him further down the rabbit hole, past archaeology, past reason, into a space where science and spirituality blurred. Standing alone in that ancient temple, torchlight flickering against alien faces, carved into rock, Giorgio realized the truth might not be hidden at all. It might be staring right at us, carved into our history, sung in our prayers, drawn in the sand by hands that remembered. He lowered the torch and whispered, "They wanted us to find this," and somewhere, deep in the shadows, it felt like the stones were listening. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of gold under a merciless sun. Giorgio shielded his eyes as the wind carried sand across his boots, whispering through the cracks of forgotten stone. Before him rose the impossible, the pyramids of Giza, 3 perfect giants, defying time, gravity, and logic. He stood in silence, feeling the same awe the ancients must have felt. You can't stand before them without feeling small. You can't study them without questioning everything you've ever been told. He walked closer, running his hand along the limestone. Each block weighed several tons, cut and placed with microscopic precision. No visible mistakes. Some aligned to true north, with accuracy modern tools can barely replicate. Thousands of slaves, textbooks said. Rams, historians repeated. But standing there, Giorgio couldn't see exhaustion or chaos. He saw purpose, he saw design, and he couldn't shake the feeling that whoever built this wasn't just human. Because here's the truth, these monuments were never meant to be random tombs. Their geometry, their alignment, their symmetry, they scream intention. They mirror the stars, the constellations, the movement of the heavens. As if someone wanted to remind future generations to look up, to remember where they came from, to not forget the teachers who once walked among them. It wasn't just Egypt. Thousands of miles away, in the jungles of Mexico, the Mayans built pyramids with the same cosmic precision. At Chichen Itza, during the equinox, shadows form a serpent slithering down the temple steps, a perfect illusion of movement carved by sunlight. How could civilizations separated by oceans and millennia master the same celestial language? They didn't share trade routes. They didn't share technology, yet they built as if following the same blueprint. In Peru, Giorgio climbed the walls of Sacsayhuaman. Stones, weighing over 100 tons each, carved so tightly you can't slip a sheet of paper between them. No tool marks, no explanation. The stones weren't stacked, they were shaped to interlock, forming a puzzle so advanced that even with today's technology, replicating it would be nearly impossible. He looked up at those walls and whispered to himself, "We didn't forget how to build like this. We forgot who taught us." And then there were the Nazca lines, those massive geoglyphs etched into the desert, visible only from the sky. Hundreds of figures, spirals, and runways stretching for miles. Ritual paths, scientists said. Art for the gods. But Giorgio asked the question. No one else dared. How could they design something so perfect without ever seeing it from above? Who were they drawing for? And more importantly, who was watching from the sky? In Cambodia, the Angkor Wat complex mirrored the Draco constellation. In England, Stonehenge tracked the solstices with laser-like precision. In Lebanon, the Baalbek stones weighed over 1,000 tons, each one so massive that even our most powerful cranes can't move them today. Yet someone, thousands of years ago, placed them with absolute accuracy. Why? For whom? Everywhere Giorgio went, he saw the same signature, the same message etched into stone. We were here. These weren't just monuments. They were communication, architecture as a language, a universal code left behind by those who understood the stars, physics and mathematics long before we did. He thought back to the myths, gods descending in fiery chariots, teaching humanity agriculture, astronomy, and architecture. The so-called gods who brought light to the dark ages of mankind. What if they weren't gods at all? What if they were visitors, advanced beings who gave humanity the spark of civilization, and then vanished, leaving behind stone clues so massive, so enduring, that no empire or religion could erase them? Standing atop Machu Picchu, as clouds rolled through the Andes, Giorgio felt that eerie sense again, as if the air itself remembered. The same patterns kept emerging, the same astronomical alignments. It was as though these ancient builders were following the same instructions. But who gave them the plans? Who told them to point their temples toward specific stars? Historians call it coincidence. Giorgio calls it communication, a universal whisper that transcends culture, language, and time. Look up, it says. You were never alone. He took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun dipped behind the pyramids. These monuments, he thought, aren't just relics, they're reminders that history, as we know it, might be missing its greatest chapter, the one written in the stars. Because maybe, just maybe, the truth was never lost. It was carved in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to see. The cave was silent, except for the sound of dripping water echoing off its walls. Giorgio's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing something that didn't belong. A pattern etched deep into the rock, circles inside triangles, lines pointing upward, a message perhaps from a time before writing even existed. He knelt, brushed away centuries of dust, and felt the cool, deliberate grooves beneath his fingers. Whoever made this wasn't random. They were sending something forward in time. And Giorgio knew he was staring at a language older than history itself. Ancient civilizations didn't just build, they communicated in stone. Every line, every angle, every alignment held meaning. The Great Pyramid wasn't only a tomb, it was a message, encoded in math and light. Its height multiplied by 1,000 equals the distance from Earth to the Sun. Its base measures the planet's circumference. Coincidence? Or a deliberate act by those who wanted to remind us that they knew, perhaps even before us, where we are in the cosmos? In Bolivia's Tiwanaku, carvings depict beings with helmets and tools that resemble modern machinery. In Egypt, hieroglyphs show figures descending from what look like flying discs. In India's ancient texts, gods ride in vimanas, machines that soar through the sky and unleash fire. Everywhere Giorgio looked, the same message appeared, written not in words but in symbols, symbols that pointed upward, as if humanity's first teachers were telling us where they came from. He thought of the Sumerians, the world's first recorded civilization. Their tablets spoke of the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens to shape mankind. The name itself meant those who came from above. They brought knowledge of stars, laws, and agriculture. They taught humanity how to build cities, measure time, and worship the sky. But over centuries, their story was twisted, buried beneath myth. Giorgio often wondered, if their stories were true, then maybe our search for gods was really a search for our creators, the ones who left when their work was done. In Egypt, the story was the same, but under different names. Thoth, the god of wisdom, said to have come from the stars, taught mankind the arts of writing and science. The Mayans spoke of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, who descended from the heavens to bring knowledge and order. In Greece, Prometheus stole fire from the gods. But what if fire wasn't literal flame? What if it meant technology, intelligence, or awareness? The light of creation itself. Giorgio stared at the carvings again, tracing the ancient language of circles and lines. They weren't just decorating, he murmured. They were documenting. Each carving, each symbol, a clue. Humanity's oldest diary, written by hands that might not have been entirely human. He imagined those hands long, steady, precise, carving their story into stone so it would outlast floods, wars, and the forgetfulness of time. The stones spoke in mathematics, in alignment, in resonance. Giorgio remembered standing inside the king's chamber, hearing the low hum that vibrated through the granite. Scientists said it was natural acoustics. But what if it was a signal, a tone, tuned to the frequency of the earth itself, like an ancient instrument meant to communicate not with words but with vibration? Modern engineers discovered that when the chamber resonates, it amplifies sound in a way that could carry beyond its walls. Giorgio couldn't help but wonder if that was the point. Everywhere he went, he found the same geometry, sacred ratios, cosmic alignments, recurring patterns, circles, triangles, spirals, all repeating through cultures that supposedly never met. It was as if the same teachers had visited them all, leaving a code for those who could one day read it. And perhaps we finally can. As night fell, Giorgio sat by the cave's entrance, the carvings glowing faintly in the firelight. He flipped through his notebook, sketches of patterns from Egypt, Peru, Turkey, and India. The same symbols, over and over. It's not random, he whispered. It's a network. Maybe Earth wasn't just home to humanity. Maybe it was a map, one that connected temples, pyramids, and mountains into a grid of energy, a grid that could only make sense from above. If you were trying to speak to future civilizations, wouldn't you do it in stone? Wouldn't you encode your message in architecture, knowing it would survive everything else? Giorgio believed that's exactly what they did. A language of gods, carved in silence, waiting for us to evolve enough to listen. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the stars that mirrored the carvings above. They told us, he thought. They always told us. We just forgot how to read. The sound of the wind against the plateau was sharp, almost metallic, as if the air itself remembered the machines that once moved here. Giorgio stepped carefully across the ruins of Pumapunku in Bolivia, a site so precise it seemed to mock time itself. Massive stone blocks lay scattered like a puzzle disassembled by centuries, their edges laser straight, their corners perfectly square. He knelt beside one, running his fingers along the surface. It wasn't chiseled, it wasn't carved, it was machined. No bronze tools could have done this. No primitive hand could cut granite like butter. Yet these stones, some weighing over 100 tons, were shaped, lifted, and fitted together with precision, so fine that a modern engineer would need power tools to replicate it. And here's the mystery that keeps Giorgio awake at night. This site was built thousands of years before the Inca, by a civilization that, according to archaeology, shouldn't have had the knowledge or the means to do any of it. He stood up and looked around, the sun low behind the Andes, shadows crawling through the ruins. This isn't the work of trial and error, he whispered. This is engineering, and not just any engineering. It was purposeful, mathematical, and advanced. In Egypt, the same puzzle appeared. The Great Pyramid's internal structure showed evidence of advanced acoustic design, as if the builders understood how sound frequencies could move energy. The granite blocks were charged with quartz, a mineral that vibrates when exposed to energy. Coincidence? Or were these monuments not just tombs, but machines, ancient technologies we no longer understand? Giorgio remembered the moment he first touched the granite walls of the king's chamber. They were warm, almost humming. Engineers who studied the pyramid found traces of piezoelectric properties, meaning the stones themselves could convert vibration into energy. Was this a coincidence of geology, or a deliberate design by a civilization that harnessed the earth itself as a power source? He thought about Baghdad. The clay jars found near the Tigris River, dated thousands of years before Christ. When tested, they produced an electric current. Archaeologists called them the Baghdad batteries. Giorgio called them something else. Evident proof that ancient civilizations might have understood electricity long before we rediscovered it. And then there was the Antikythera mechanism, a device found in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. Bronze gears, intricate beyond comprehension, used to track planetary movements with astonishing precision. 2,000 years old, yet functioning like a modern analog computer. Scientists call it an anomaly. Giorgio calls it a clue, because anomalies, when added together, form a pattern, and patterns tell stories. Everywhere he looked, the story was the same. Lost knowledge, impossible craftsmanship, technology centuries ahead of its time. In India's ancient epics, weapons that burned brighter than the sun, celestial arrows that could level entire cities. In Peru, massive stones transported miles over mountains with no evidence of tools, wheels, or ramps. In Turkey, Kuyu, an underground city carved deep into volcanic rock, ventilated with perfect airflow systems. How could people with primitive tools and no machinery achieve what even modern engineers would struggle to recreate? Standing in Puma Punku, Giorgio could almost hear the hum of engines, the clang of tools that no longer exist. We didn't just lose knowledge, he thought. We lost connection. Maybe these weren't human technologies at all. Maybe they were gifts, remnants of something greater, something left behind for us to find, once we were ready to understand. But readiness comes with humility, and humanity hasn't always been humble. Throughout history, every time we rediscover something ancient that shouldn't exist, a machine, a structure, a map, we label it an outlier, an accident, or a myth, because to accept that ancient people may have worked with extraterrestrial intelligence would mean rewriting everything we know about who we are. He gazed at the ruins as the sky turned crimson. The angles, the precision, the silent language of stone, all of it felt deliberate. These weren't relics of superstition. They were fragments of an ancient science, a science that might have powered light, sound, or even flight, long before we thought such things were possible. As night fell, the stars emerged, glittering over the Andean peaks. Giorgio raised his eyes to them. The same stars the builders once looked upon, the same constellations mirrored in their monuments. They built for the sky, he whispered. They always did, and maybe that was the point all along, not to build monuments for the dead, but to build machines for the future. Messages, humming faintly across millennia, waiting for us to finally tune in. The storm rolled over the desert like a living thing, lightning slicing through the horizon, as Giorgio's jeep tore across the sand. In the distance, black silhouettes rose from the earth, ancient statues, weathered by wind and time, their faces turned to the sky. He stopped the engine and stepped out, rain striking his jacket, thunder echoing like drums of some forgotten ritual. He stared at the colossal figures, their eyes, their helmets, their strange inhuman proportions. These weren't gods carved from imagination. They were portraits, memories of encounters so profound, humanity could only describe them as divine. History calls them gods, but what if they were visitors, flesh and blood beings, who walked among our ancestors, teaching, guiding, and shaping the world as we know it? Every ancient civilization has the same stories. In Sumer, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens. In Egypt, the Naders came from the stars. The Dogon tribe in Africa spoke of beings from Sirius, a star system they somehow knew existed long before modern astronomy confirmed it. The Hopi talked of the Kachinas, spirits who traveled through the sky and promised to return. Different lands, different languages, same message. Giorgio had stood among the Zulu elders, listening as they told him about the Watusi, tall, pale-skinned visitors who came from the stars. Long before recorded history, he remembered their words clearly. They came to teach, and they came in peace. Similar stories appeared in South America, where the god Viracocha was said to have walked among men, bringing knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and architecture, only to vanish across the sea, promising one day to return. It wasn't faith that connected these tales. It was memory. humanity's oldest, most persistent memory. Standing among those statues, Giorgio could almost imagine it. A world before history, when the sky was full of fire, and beings descended not as ghosts or dreams, but as visitors from above. To ancient eyes, their technology, glowing, roaring, and flying, must have seemed like magic. But it wasn't magic. It was science. And maybe, just maybe, the temples, the myths, the rituals, all of it were humanity's attempt to remember that moment, to honor those who came, and to keep their promise alive through generations. He thought of the petroglyphs in Val Camonica, Italy. Thousands of figures carved into rock, depicting humanoids wearing helmets, standing beside objects that look eerily like spacecraft, or the ancient Indian texts, describing vimanas, aerial vehicles powered by light and sound, used in wars between the gods, or the carvings in Abydos, Egypt, showing shapes that resemble helicopters, planes, and even rockets. Coincidences, they say, but Giorgio didn't believe in coincidences that spanned continents. He remembered a moment in northern Peru, a small village, deep in the Andes, where the locals spoke of the Shining Ones. They described them as tall, radiant beings who descended from the sky, leaving behind trails of fire. The villagers pointed to a mountain ridge, where at night, strange lights still appeared. Giorgio spent 3 nights there, watching, waiting. On the final night, a blue glow flickered above the ridge, silent, steady, unexplainable. He couldn't prove what it was, but deep down, he felt it. History was whispering through time. The ancients didn't just see these beings, they knew them. They built temples in their honor. They recorded their teachings in stone. They shaped entire belief systems around their visits. And when those beings left, humanity was left grasping for their return, turning knowledge into worship, technology into mythology. But what if the gods never truly left? What if their presence lingers, not in the sky, but in our DNA? Giorgio often wondered whether the missing link in human evolution, that sudden leap from primitive to conscious, was not natural but intentional. What if we were helped, nudged, or even engineered? It sounds unbelievable until you trace the parallels. The Sumerians said the Anunnaki created humans to bear their image. The Bible says, man was made in the likeness of God. The Mayans said, humanity was molded from corn and divine essence. All different words for the same moment when earth met sky. Lightning cracked across the desert again, illuminating the statues' faces. Giorgio stood there, drenched, shivering, yet electrified by the realization that these myths, these so-called legends, might not be legends at all. They were records, evidence that our ancestors didn't just dream of gods. They met them. He tilted his head back, staring into the storm, eyes fixed on the dark heavens above. If they walked among us once, he thought, then maybe they still do. And somewhere, beyond the thunder, beyond the veil of clouds, the stars shimmered like ancient eyes, watching, waiting, remembering. The museum was quiet, its air thick with dust and secrets. Giorgio moved slowly between the glass cases, his reflection mingling with the artifacts of forgotten worlds, clay tablets, golden discs, carvings that didn't fit the timeline. He stopped at one, a small figure, barely 6 inches tall, with an elongated skull and almond-shaped eyes. The label beneath it read, Do-gu figurine, Japan, 1000 BCE. But the shape, the posture, the details, they looked eerily familiar. Not human, not divine. Something in between. The Do-gu figures of Japan were supposed to represent gods or fertility idols. But their strange suits, their helmets, their goggle-like eyes, they looked more like astronauts than deities. Giorgio leaned closer, whispering to himself. They were trying to show us what they saw. Across the world, the same figures appear. Sumerian statues with helmets, Mayan carvings of beings inside capsules, Egyptian hieroglyphs showing humans speaking to taller, robed figures with elongated heads. Different names, same shape. Then there was the London hammer, a tool encased in solid rock, dated to over 100 million years old. Impossible, according to every geological rule. Or the Piri-Reis map, drawn in 1513, showing the coastlines of Antarctica centuries before it was supposedly discovered, mapped with an accuracy even modern satellites struggle to match. How? Giorgio would ask, his voice echoing through lecture halls. How could a 16th century admiral chart the exact shape of a continent buried under miles of ice? Each piece of forbidden evidence chips away at the story we've been told, a story where human civilization began only 6,000 years ago. But these relics whisper a different truth, that someone else was here long before us. Someone who understood the stars, the earth, and time itself. Giorgio remembered standing in Ecuador's Cueva de los Tallos, a labyrinth of tunnels rumored to contain metal books engraved with unknown symbols. Deep inside, explorers had found perfectly smooth walls, as if cut by machinery, not hand tools. Among the relics were metallic plates showing maps of the Earth and solar system, carved with a precision that defied explanation. Scientists dismissed them as hoaxes. Giorgio didn't. Why would ancient people carve maps of planets they couldn't even see, he'd ask. And how did they know what the solar system looked like? He'd seen the same pattern at Saqqara, Egypt. A small wooden carving, dated over 2,000 years before flight, shaped unmistakably like a modern airplane. Wings, fuselage, tail fin. Dismissed by historians as a bird. But the aerodynamic design was too perfect to be accidental. If it looks like an airplane, Giorgio would say, maybe it is an airplane. And then there's the crystal skulls. Dozens of them, scattered across museums and private collections. Some perfectly carved from single blocks of quartz. Modern jewelers, using advanced tools, can't replicate their smoothness or microscopic symmetry. The legend says they were gifts from the sky beings. A network of knowledge meant to be reunited when humanity is ready to understand. To skeptics, these are coincidences, curiosities, or forgery. But Giorgio has spent his life connecting the fragments, every artifact, every myth, every anomaly. Each one, he believes, is a breadcrumb in a trail left behind by those who came before us, or those who came for. In Mexico, he held a stone carving in his hand. A depiction of a humanoid figure operating what looked like a control panel, surrounded by what seemed to be stars and planets. The figure wore something strikingly similar to a helmet. The carving had been dismissed by mainstream archaeologists. Too modern, they said. Giorgio smiled when he heard that. Exactly, he replied. It's the same story with the drapa stones of China. Small discs with spiraled grooves, said to contain microscopic inscriptions telling the story of beings who descended from the clouds and became stranded on Earth. The tribes who discovered them worshipped these beings as ancestors. The stones were hidden, confiscated, forgotten. But Giorgio never forgot them. He believes these artifacts aren't just mistakes in history. They're evidence of a forgotten chapter. One deliberately buried because it challenges the foundation of everything we think we know. Because if even one of these objects is real, if even one predates the civilization that supposedly created it, then the history books are wrong. He stood in that museum, surrounded by silent witnesses of a forgotten truth, and felt the weight of it all. We walk through history blind, he whispered, because we're afraid of what we might see. Thunder rumbled outside as rain streaked down the glass cases. Giorgio turned one last time to the Dogu figure, its alien eyes staring back through centuries. You saw them, didn't you? He murmured. And you carved what you saw. Maybe they all did. And maybe deep down, that's what history has been trying to tell us. That the truth about who we are has been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to stop looking for gods and start looking for evidence. He stood on the edge of the plateau, wind howling through the stones of Machu Picchu. The morning fog clung to the terraces, curling around the ruins like smoke from a fire, long extinguished. Giorgio watched the first rays of sunlight stretch over the Andes and touched the perfectly carved stones. Each one fitted so tightly, not even a blade of grass could slide between them. No mortar, no machinery, just precision. He ran his hand over the surface and whispered, "How?" Everywhere he went he saw the same pattern, the same impossible engineering, the same obsession with the stars. Egypt, Peru, Mexico, Cambodia, thousands of miles apart, built in different eras by different people, and yet somehow they followed the same blueprint. The pyramids of Giza and the pyramids of Teotihuacan aligned perfectly with Orion's belt. The temples of Angkor mirrored the Draco constellation. The great Zimbabwe ruins, Nabta Playa, Stonehenge, all marked celestial paths with mathematical accuracy. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. Giorgio's notebook was filled with diagrams, maps, and overlapping constellations. He drew lines connecting sites that shouldn't have been connected. Yet every time, the geometry repeated itself. Triangles, grids, alignments, pointing to the same stars. "It's a global pattern," he told his crew, as if someone gave humanity the same set of instructions and told them, "Build here." He remembered standing at Giza at dawn. As the sun rose directly between the two largest pyramids, he imagined the scene, thousands of years ago. Priests in white robes watching the horizon, chanting to the gods of the sky, following rituals older than memory itself. But what if those rituals weren't spiritual? What if they were technical? What if the pyramids weren't tombs, but beacons? Every ancient culture spoke of beings who descended from the heavens, taught them the secrets of the stars, and promised to return. The Egyptians called them the Nidir. The Mayans called them the Sky Lords. The Sumerians named them the Anunnaki. Giorgio began to notice the overlap, not just in the stories, but in the symbols. The winged discs, the serpents descending from the sky, the solar boats that traveled across the heavens, the same story told through different eyes. In the jungles of Guatemala he walked among the temples of Tikal, their steps steep and narrow. On the walls he saw carvings of beings with wings, holding strange devices, standing beside fire-belching machines. The guide said they were gods. Giorgio nodded, but thought otherwise. They were trying to show us what they saw. He murmured, the same thought that had followed him from one continent to the next. In India, he stood before the ancient carvings of Ellora and listened to scholars recite verses from the Mahabharata, describing weapons that shone brighter than 1,000 suns, machines that soared through the sky, cities obliterated in flashes of light. These weren't metaphors, they were eyewitness accounts. And if these myths are truly memories, then perhaps they all remember the same event, a time when Earth wasn't alone. The deeper Giorgio dug, the more the lines blurred between myth and evidence. He'd spread maps across his hotel room floor, marking every ancient site that shared astronomical or geometric patterns. When he connected the dots, a strange formation emerged, one that mirrored the stars themselves. The Earth, he whispered, is a reflection of the heavens. He began to call it the cosmic blueprint, the idea that ancient civilizations were not building randomly, but according to a universal design, one that could only have come from a shared source of knowledge. But how could civilizations separated by oceans and millennia share the same architectural language? Maybe they didn't communicate across the sea. Maybe they all learned from the same teachers. He thought of the legends that spoke of star maps given to humans by beings who came from above, of the Hopi prophecy that says, "As in the heavens, so on earth," of the Hermetic axiom, "As above, so below." These weren't coincidences, they were instructions, messages embedded in stone, repeated through culture, waiting for someone to decode them. At Göbekli Tepe, Turkey, the oldest known temple in the world, Giorgio stood before pillars carved with animals and celestial symbols. The site dated back more than 11,000 years, long before any known civilization should have been capable of such complexity. And yet, its builders mapped the sky with perfect precision, They knew, he whispered. They knew exactly where they came from and where they were going. He imagined a world long before history began, a golden age of knowledge where humans walked beside their teachers from the stars. Then something happened, a cataclysm, a reset. Humanity forgot, but traces remained, encoded in stone, whispered through myth, passed down through temples and tribes. The same patterns, the same memories. The cosmic blueprint wasn't just about architecture. It was about connection, about remembering that we are part of something bigger. Every temple, every alignment, every myth is a fragment of a larger message. You are not alone. Giorgio looked up from the ruins, his eyes tracing the stars emerging through the dusk. They left us a map, he said quietly. We just have to learn how to read it. And as the wind carried his words across the ancient stones, it felt as if the earth itself was listening, waiting for humanity to remember what it once knew. The desert night was silent, except for the flicker of firelight against the sandstone walls. Giorgio sat beside an old Bedouin storyteller in Wadi Rum, the so-called Valley of the Moon. The man's face was etched with years of sun and wind, his voice deep and measured. They came from the sky, he said, eyes glinting in the dark. Fire chariots, bright as the sun. They spoke to our fathers and told them to build. Giorgio leaned closer, his recorder hidden under his jacket. He'd heard similar words before, in Egypt, in Mexico, in India. But here, under the open stars, they felt older, truer. The storyteller pointed upward. They promised to return. His words hung in the air like smoke. Giorgio followed his gaze. Above them, the Milky Way stretched across the sky, a river of light. For a moment, it felt less like myth and more like memory. Every ancient civilization had its messengers, figures who claimed to have spoken with gods, angels, or beings of light. Moses on Mount Sinai, Ezekiel and his fiery wheel, Enoch walking with the Lord and taken into heaven. The Hindu sage Vyasa, describing flying vimanas, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who descended from the sky and promised to come again. The Dogon, elders of Mali, who somehow knew about Sirius's invisible companion star, centuries before modern telescopes confirmed it. Were these prophets truly divine emissaries, or were they witnesses to something else? Giorgio couldn't ignore the similarities. The descriptions were consistent: blinding light, thunderous sound, beings clothed in radiance, descending machines. Gods, they called them, because how else could ancient minds interpret technology beyond comprehension? He often asked audiences in his lectures, if a jet landed in the Bronze Age, what would they call it? The answer was always the same: a miracle. But what if those miracles were visits? He thought of Ezekiel's vision, a wheel within a wheel, spinning in the sky, metallic and glowing, guided by strange beings with multiple faces. To theologians it was divine symbolism. To Giorgio it was a technical report: propulsion, rotation, light, noise. Technology disguised as theology. In India's Mahabharata, there were machines that roared through the air and weapons that could destroy entire cities. In the Bible, pillars of fire led tribes through the wilderness. In Mesoamerica, gods arrived on flying serpents and taught mathematics and astronomy. Each tale, separated by oceans and centuries, carried the same structure: beings descend, teach humanity, ascend, and promise to return. Giorgio remembered sitting in a dim archive in Rome, surrounded by ancient manuscripts. He read letters from early missionaries who described local legends of white gods descending from the sky. They taught language, agriculture, and architecture, then vanished. They said they would return from the east, one friar wrote. Giorgio circled that line in red. He'd seen it too many times to ignore. What if the prophets were interpreters, humans chosen to relay knowledge from an advanced source? The languages of religion, myth, and science might be different, but perhaps they all tried to describe the same communication. He once asked a Hopi elder about their star ancestors, the Kachinas. The man smiled and said, "They taught us how to live with the earth. They come when we forget." Giorgio never forgot that phrase. They come when we forget. What if these beings returned not to rule, but to remind? He began collecting patterns, not just in architecture, but in prophecy, flood myths appearing everywhere at once. Stories of sky gods promising rebirth, warnings of destruction from above if humanity lost balance. From the Book of Enoch to the Popol Vuh, the message was eerily consistent. The sky is watching, and when humanity strays too far, it will intervene. Giorgio wasn't a preacher, but he couldn't shake the feeling that these messengers were trying to tell us something timeless, something buried beneath layers of ritual and religion. Every prophet describes contact, he said in an interview once. Every miracle sounds like technology. Every commandment feels like a warning. Maybe we're just reading ancient field notes through the wrong lens. He thought of Fatima in 1917, tens of thousands of people witnessing a sun dancing in the sky. The event became a miracle in Catholic lore, but photographs and testimonies described something circular, metallic, erratic, nothing like the sun. The crowd saw light. The faithful saw divinity. Giorgio saw continuity. Could the messengers still be among us? Not as gods this time, but as watchers, waiting for us to catch up. In his travels, Giorgio often felt that sense of being observed, as if the story was unfolding, both on Earth and somewhere far beyond it. The idea didn't frighten him anymore. It humbled him. He believed that these ancient encounters weren't about worship. They were about awakening. The messengers didn't want devotion. They wanted remembrance. Humanity had once been connected to the stars, and they came to keep that connection alive. As dawn broke over Wadi Rum, the storyteller's fire turned to ash. Giorgio stood and looked east, where the first light touched the red cliffs. For a moment, he imagined what those prophets saw. A sky splitting open, light descending, voices from the heavens. Maybe, he thought, they weren't warning us at all. Maybe they were preparing us, and somewhere deep inside, he felt it, a quiet certainty that the next message was already on its way. The sky over Washington, D.C., shimmered with strange lights. It was July 1952, humid, heavy, and still, until radar operators at the National Airport saw something impossible. 7 unknown objects, darting across restricted airspace above the U.S. Capitol. They moved fast, then stopped dead mid-air, then shot off again faster than any known aircraft could fly. Jets were scrambled. Pilots gave chase. But as soon as they approached, the lights vanished, only to reappear behind them seconds later. The newspapers called it the invasion of Washington. The Pentagon called it weather anomalies. But Giorgio called it something else entirely: proof. For him, this was not just another UFO sighting. This was the moment when modern history collided with the ancient past. The same sky gods, the same chariots of fire, now flying over the heart of modern civilization. And yet, humanity reacted the same way it always had. Fear, denial, silence. The strange part, this wasn't an isolated event. From Roswell to Rendlesham, from Phoenix to Tic Tac, every decade had its miracle. Every government had its cover-up. But when Giorgio compared the testimonies of military pilots, radar technicians, and civilians, he saw something eerily familiar. The language had changed, but the descriptions hadn't. In 1561, the citizens of Nuremberg watched glowing spheres and cylinders battle in the sky. They drew what they saw: flying discs, smoke, and fire. In 1897, farmers in Texas claimed a metallic airship crashed in a field. They buried the pilot, described as not of this world. Fast forward to the 21st century, and Navy pilots filmed crafts with no wings, no exhaust, moving in ways that defied physics. Different centuries, Same phenomenon. History repeats itself, Giorgio said in an interview, his tone steady but electric. But it only repeats for those who aren't paying attention. He had spent years studying declassified documents. Project Blue Book, the Condon Report, CIA memos. Buried beneath the redacted lines were fragments that hinted at something extraordinary. Unidentified aerial phenomena, exhibiting intelligent control, technological performance beyond our capability, national security implications, bureaucratic phrases for something ancient, the return of the Watchers. And yet, despite overwhelming evidence, radar data, pilot recordings, videos confirmed by the Pentagon itself, most people still dismissed it. Giorgio understood why. To accept it meant rewriting everything. Religion, history, science, identity. People fear losing the story that makes them feel safe, he often said. But what if the real story is bigger, older, and more beautiful than we were ever told? He thought back to 1947, the year of Roswell. A rancher found strange debris scattered across the desert. Metallic, lightweight, unlike anything seen before. The military first called it a flying disc, then changed its story within hours. The wreckage vanished. Witnesses were silenced, and the legend was born. But decades later, deathbed confessions and leaked documents suggested it wasn't just a balloon. It was something else, something from the stars. And Roswell wasn't the first. It was simply the one we couldn't hide anymore. Giorgio collected testimonies from pilots, generals, and even scientists who had seen what the world refused to see. Commander David Frover's Tic-Tac encounter, the Phoenix Lights, seen by thousands, the Belgian wave, tracked by military radar for months. Every story chipped away at the illusion that we were alone. He once met a retired intelligence officer who whispered, "We've always known. We just don't know how to tell the public." Giorgio didn't record that conversation, but he remembered every word. The man's hands trembled. His eyes looked haunted, as if he had seen something that rewired his understanding of reality. People think disclosure will come in a single announcement, Giorgio later told an audience. But it's already happening. Piece by piece, whisper by whisper. He believed that modern UFOs weren't new visitors. They were old friends returning. The same beings who once guided the ancients, now watching from above, observing a species on the brink of rediscovering its origin. They never left, he said. They've just been waiting for us to evolve enough to recognize them again. But the truth had a cost. Every revelation came with resistance, ridicule, censorship, career destruction. Scientists laughed at him. Skeptics mocked him. Governments labeled him entertainer, not researcher. Yet Giorgio pressed on, because the patterns were undeniable. He compared modern sightings to ancient records. Fiery wheels in the Bible, celestial shields over Rome, burning discs in medieval chronicles. The technology had evolved, or maybe our perception had, but the encounters remained constant. The same lights that guided Moses through the desert now danced over military bases and nuclear facilities. Coincidence? Giorgio didn't think so. To him, every sighting was a reminder. Humanity was standing on the same threshold as its ancestors, staring into the sky, trying to understand what it saw. The ancients called it divine. We call it extraterrestrial. But maybe it's neither. Maybe it's family. As the night deepened in the Nevada desert, Giorgio sat near Area 51, watching for lights. The horizon glowed faintly orange from distant flares. He smiled. "They're out there," he whispered, "and they've been patient for a very, very long time." Then, just for a second, something streaked across the sky, silent, fast, impossible. Not a plane, not a meteor, gone in an instant, but enough to make his pulse quicken. He didn't need proof anymore. He had faith, because deep down, he believed the modern UFO phenomenon wasn't just about contact. It was about remembrance. The messengers had returned, not to reveal themselves, but to remind humanity of what it once knew. The stars were never empty. The document remains private for now. No one knows exactly when it was written or by whom. But Giorgio claimed he once saw a photocopy in a dimly lit archive outside Washington, D.C. On the first page it read, Majestic 12. The words were followed by a list of names, generals, scientists, intelligence officers. The note at the bottom said only, to oversee and contain. Contain what? That question haunted him. For decades, governments had denied everything. UFOs didn't exist. Witnesses were mistaken. Data was misread. But buried in the black ink of redacted files, Giorgio found hints. Enough to build a picture of a massive, global effort to hide something extraordinary. Documents labeled eyes only. Testimonies sealed under oath. Photographs confiscated. Scientists pressured into silence. The more he investigated, the clearer the motive became. The truth wasn't just strange. It was destabilizing. Imagine it. Definitive proof that humans are not alone. Religion would shatter. Power structures would crumble. Economies, militaries, even national borders would suddenly look small, meaningless. Those who ruled by control would lose their grip overnight. Giorgio believed that's why the truth stayed buried, not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real, too big to manage, too powerful to release. It's not fear of aliens, he once said. It's fear of losing control. He'd met insiders, men with titles, clearances, and that particular way of speaking that said they'd seen things they could never mention. One of them told him, the cover-up isn't about hiding the evidence. It's about buying time. Time to understand the technology. Time to reverse engineer it. Time to make sure humanity didn't panic before those in power figured out how to profit from it. In the 1940s, they called it the Trinity Project. In the 1950s, Project Blue Book. In the 2000s, AAT. Each one a new name for the same mission. Study, contain, deny. But the closer Giorgio looked, the more he realized how deep it went. Governments weren't just studying crashed objects. They were rewriting history itself to erase the evidence of past contact. Ancient sites misdated, artifacts mislabeled, text reinterpreted to remove celestial references. It's all about narrative control, Giorgio said. Whoever controls the story controls belief, and belief controls the world. He found a pattern. Every time a new discovery threatened to challenge accepted history, it vanished into private collections, lost in museums, or quietly reclassified. When radar operators caught unexplainable objects, reports were rewritten as weather. When pilots spoke up, they were grounded. When astronauts hinted at sightings, their transmissions were censored. In 1969, NASA officially ended its public investigation into UFOs. Yet, behind closed doors, funding quietly continued under advanced aerospace studies. Documents surfaced years later, showing a list of research topics: anti-gravity propulsion, wormhole travel, energy field manipulation. Giorgio smiled when he read that. They're not investigating weather balloons with wormholes, he said. He often quoted Carl Jung, who once called UFOs modern myths. Giorgio agreed, but added, every myth starts with something real. He believed the cover-up began not as conspiracy, but as necessity. After the Second World War, the world was fractured, fearful, and armed to the teeth. The discovery of something beyond human comprehension could have sparked chaos. So governments buried the truth to maintain order. But over time, that secrecy grew into an empire of silence, one that fed itself on fear and control. He recalled a conversation with a retired scientist from Los Alamos, who told him, "We were told to think of it as containment, not deceit." Giorgio asked, "Containment of what?" The man's eyes darkened. Of the human reaction. And yet, despite the walls of secrecy, the truth kept leaking through the cracks. Pilots going public, classified videos released, whistleblowers risking their lives. Every revelation made the silence harder to maintain. The world was waking up. Giorgio believed that's why, in recent years, governments had shifted their language. UFOs became UAPs, cover-up became transparency. A new story for an old truth. They're preparing us, Giorgio said, for something they can no longer hide. But even he understood the danger. If the truth about extraterrestrial presence became undeniable, the greatest powers on Earth would lose their monopoly over mystery. And that, he knew, was their greatest fear. Because once humanity realized the sky belonged to everyone, control would crumble. He often imagined that first global announcement, the cameras, the microphones, the trembling hands of politicians, forced to admit what they'd denied for decades. It wouldn't be triumph. It would be reckoning. The cover-up, Giorgio once said, was never about the alien. It was always about us. About whether we're ready to know who we really are. As he stared out over the quiet expanse of the Nevada desert one night, he felt the irony. The stars above had seen every lie, every silence, every hidden truth, and they just kept shining, waiting, because no matter how powerful the cover-up, the universe doesn't keep secrets forever. The night sky over the Atacama Desert stretched endlessly, a sea of light, pierced by stars so bright they seemed almost alive. Giorgio stood in silence, his boots sinking into the red sand, eyes fixed on the Milky Way above him. It wasn't just beautiful, it was humbling. Every star felt like a memory, every constellation a message. For years he had chased fragments, carvings, myths, patterns. But here, under this infinite canopy, he felt the story converge. It wasn't about aliens anymore. It was about us. He whispered, "We've never been alone." And for the first time, he didn't say it to convince anyone. He said it because he finally believed it in his bones. Humanity had spent millennia looking outward, waiting for something to descend from the sky. But Giorgio began to realize the truth might be reversed. The awakening wasn't about visitors arriving. It was about us remembering where we came from. Every discovery, every sighting, every myth was not just evidence of contact, but evidence of connection. We were part of a cosmic family that had been watching, waiting, guiding, until we were ready to understand. He thought about how far we had come, from firelight to fiber optics, from stone carvings to space telescopes. The ancients had looked at the stars and seen gods. We look at them now and see galaxies. The language changed, but the wonder remained the same. Maybe that was the point all along. Evolution not of body, but of consciousness. Humanity's greatest journey, Giorgio once said, is not to the stars. It's back to ourselves. He began to see history not as a timeline, but as a spiral, a cycle of forgetting and remembering. Ancient civilizations had glimpsed truths we lost, and now in the age of technology, we were rediscovering them through science. Quantum physics spoke of parallel realities, energy fields, and dimensions beyond perception. The same concepts mystics described thousands of years ago. The ancients called them heavens. Physicists now call them multiverses. Two languages for the same mystery. Maybe the gods of old weren't supernatural. Maybe they were natural, just operating at a level of reality we've only begun to understand. In that realization, Giorgio found hope, because it meant that enlightenment wasn't about waiting for beings from the sky to save us. It was about awakening the part of ourselves that already remembers them. The seed of that knowledge was already within us, dormant but alive. He remembered the Hopi elders' words, "They come when we forget." Perhaps, he thought, that's why UFOs had returned, not to reveal themselves, but to remind us it's time to remember again. Humanity was approaching a threshold, a moment where science, spirituality, and myth could finally speak the same language. Every ancient site he'd visited, from Giza to Tiwanaku to Göbekli Tepe, wasn't just a monument to power. It was a map, pointing back to the stars, whispering, "You belong to something greater." The ancients had built those structures, not to worship gods, but to preserve the memory of the sky, to ensure that even when we forgot, stone would remember for us. Giorgio believed that the next great leap wouldn't be technological. It would be spiritual. When humanity finally understood that consciousness itself is the bridge between worlds, the illusion of separation would collapse. We won't need to search for them, he said. We'll realize they've been inside our story all along. He imagined a future where religion and science no longer fought each other, but completed each other, where the word alien no longer meant stranger, but origin, where children looked up at the stars, not with fear but with recognition. And maybe, just maybe, that was the destiny those ancient messengers had set in motion, a long, slow awakening, unfolding across millennia. The temples, the myths, the sightings, all breadcrumbs leading us back to where it began. Giorgio turned his gaze to the horizon as dawn began to rise over the desert. The first light touched the stones, just as it had for countless generations before him. He smiled. "They'll come again," he said softly. "Not because we need saving, but because we're finally ready to meet them as equals." The camera would zoom out then, his silhouette against the glowing sky, the vastness of the earth beneath him, and above it all the stars burning quietly, timelessly. And in that silence, his voice would echo one final time. The search for aliens was never about finding others. It was about remembering ourselves, the children of the cosmos, finally coming home. The screen fades to black. If this journey stirred something in you, that quiet whisper that maybe, just maybe, the universe has been waiting for us to open our eyes, don't let it fade. Share this story. Keep the conversation alive. Because truth doesn't belong to governments or scientists. It belongs to all of us. Every time you look up at the night sky, remember, the answers aren't hiding out there. They're awakening in here. And when enough of us remember, the silence will finally break. So if you believe humanity is ready to know who we really are, hit subscribe, join this movement, and together, let's uncover what's been hidden in plain sight. The next chapter of our story begins with you.